In the small, dusty village of Oduwene, nestled in the heart of Africa, there lived a young woman named Nyambura. She was known throughout the village not just for her beauty, but for her incredible strength and pure heart. Raised by her widowed father, a humble herbalist, Nyambura had learned to live simply but with purpose. She spent her days tending to her father's herb garden and helping the villagers with natural remedies, earning the respect and admiration of everyone around her. Despite the hardships of life, Nyambura carried herself with grace and optimism. She had a brilliant mind and a kind soul, always eager to help others. She had big dreams, though they were hidden behind the modest walls of her small home. At night, as her father slept, she would tell herself stories of adventure and love, dreaming of a world beyond the village, a world where she could be more than just a caretaker. Her heart was full of love for her father, and she worked tirelessly to ensure he never lacked anything, even if it meant sacrificing her own desires. Nyambura's spirit shone through in everything she did, and it was easy to see that she was destined for something greater, though she didn't yet know how the world would challenge her. Nyambura's life, though simple, was rich with beauty, but it wasn't until she met Kobe that she truly began to understand what love was. Kobe was everything she had never imagined: quiet, serious, and hard-working. Coming from a well-off farming family, he had the kind of life that was far from her own. His days were spent toiling under the sun, cultivating the land his family owned, and he had little time for anything else. Yet, when their paths first crossed, something extraordinary happened. It was on a warm afternoon, near the village river, where the scent of fresh earth mingled with the soft whispers of the wind. Nyambura had gone to fetch water for her father, as she often did, her hands steady and graceful as she carried the heavy pot. As she bent down to fill them, she noticed a figure in the distance. It was Kobe, making his way to the same river, his strong arms carrying bundles of hay for his animals. She smiled softly, not thinking much of it at first, but then Kobe's eyes met hers. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. There was no conversation, no grand gesture, just a simple, meaningful glance that passed between them. It was as though time slowed, and in that instant, they both knew something unspoken. It wasn't the kind of love that bursts into flames right away. It was quieter, more subtle, like the soft ripples in the river water. From that day on, they found themselves meeting by the river every few days, drawn together by something neither of them could yet explain. As the days passed, their stolen glances turned into shy conversations, with each one growing more comfortable and more eager. Kobe's once stern expression softened around Nyambura, and he began to share parts of himself with her he had never shown to anyone before. Nyambura, who had always been so focused on caring for her father and the village, found herself dreaming of Kobe, of what a life with him could be like. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he listened to her, that made her heart flutter. Their meetings were always secret, as love in their village wasn't as free as they might have wanted. Nyambura's father was protective of her, and Kobe, though his family was wealthy, knew that the village had its ways, its expectations. They were from different worlds in many ways, and the idea of them being together seemed impossible. Yet, their love didn't care for boundaries. In the quiet moments by the river, they shared everything: dreams, hopes, and laughter. The conversations were innocent, full of wonder and excitement. Kobe spoke about his dreams of expanding the family farm, of making it prosperous and known far and wide. Nyambura talked about her desire to see the world, to travel beyond the village, where she could be more than just a daughter or a caretaker. They shared the small things too: the joy of hearing the first rains after a long dry season, the sight of a bird soaring high in the sky. To them, everything felt brighter, fuller when they were together. They knew they had to be careful. The village would never accept them as they were. Nyambura, the humble girl from a poor family, and Kobe, the son of a wealthy farmer. But they couldn't stop the connection that was growing between them. It was the kind of love that didn't need to be explained, it just was. They laughed at the simple things, like the way the sun set over the river or the sound of the crickets in the evening. It was a love that didn't need any grand gestures or words. Just the gentle presence of one another was enough. In those stolen moments, before the world could interfere, Nyambura and Kobe found something they hadn't been looking for: each other. It was a love that felt pure and untainted by the world around, a love that grew like the river they met by, calm, steady, but with the promise of something deep. The beauty of their growing love wasn't in its grandness, but in its simplicity. The river was their secret, a place where they could escape from everything that was expected and just be. They didn't know what the future held or how their love would survive the challenges ahead, but in that moment, they didn't need to. The sweetness of their connection was enough. Kobe's heart was set on Nyambura. He knew that she was the one, and nothing, not even the rules of tradition, would stop him from being with her. He had spent enough time with her by the river, in their secret moments, to know that their love was something deeper than any material possessions. So one day, with a deep breath, Kobe gathered the courage to speak to his parents, especially his mother, Adisa, who was known for her fierce pride and high expectation. He approached her with the news that he wanted to marry Nyambura, and though he felt nervous, he was also determined. However, Adisa's response was far from what he expected. "You want to marry that girl?" she scoffed, her voice filled with disdain. "She comes from nothing. No gold, no cattle, no wealth." Kobe's heart sank as his mother's words pierced through him. "If you want her as a wife, you will pay the price," she demanded. Adisa wasn't interested in love. For her, marriage was a transaction, an exchange of goods that would solidify their family's status. She insisted on a rich dowry, a dowry that would secure Nyambura's place in the family, at least in her eyes. 3 cows, gold ornaments, and fabrics, the finest money could buy. Kobe's stomach turned. His family was well off, yes, but they didn't have enough to fulfill such a lavish demand. Nyambura's father was a humble herbalist who would spend his life helping others, but he didn't have riches to offer. Kobe went to Nyambura's father, explained the situation, and offered what little he could: some honey, herbs, and a promise of loyalty. But Nyambura's father, with a heavy heart, knew that his humble offering would never be enough to meet the expectations set by Kobe's family. Kobe returned to his mother, empty-handed, but determined. Standing before her, he made a choice. "I love Nyambura," he said, his voice firm. "I love her for who she is, not for what she can bring or the dowry we can pay. I don't need gold or cows to marry her. I need her heart." Adisa's face turned red with fury. She'd always seen marriage as a business arrangement, and Kobe's refusal to adhere to tradition was more than she could bear. She demanded that Kobe abandon his plan, that he find someone of higher status, someone who could meet the expectations of the family. But Kobe, now more resolute than ever, made his decision. "If you want to disown me, then do it," he said. "But I'm marrying Nyambura, with or without your blessing." And so Kobe and Nyambura were married, not in the grand ceremony that Adisa had imagined, but in a modest celebration that was filled with the kind of joy money could never buy. The wedding took place under the shade of the village's great baobab tree, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The air was filled with laughter, the kind of pure joy that could only come from a union of 2 hearts. Nyambura wore a simple but beautiful dress made by her mother, and Kobe, with his love shining in his eyes, stood proudly beside her. Though the celebration was small, it was sincere. They danced under the stars, shared food, and celebrated what truly mattered: love, respect, and the bond they had built. But as the evening wore on, a familiar face appeared in the crowd: Adisa. Her eyes were fixed on the newlyweds, her gaze sharp and unforgiving. She stood at the edge of the gathering, her arms crossed tightly, watching with disapproval. Kobe's heart sank when he saw her, but he stood tall, refusing to let her presence ruin this moment. Nyambura, too, felt the weight of Adisa's glare, but she knew she had something far more powerful than riches. She had Kobe's love, and that was enough. As they exchanged vows in front of their friends and family, the joy that filled their hearts was undeniable. Despite Adisa's cold stare from afar, this wasn't a wedding for the wealthy or for status. It was a wedding for the soul, a union built on love, respect, and the simple but powerful truth that no dowry could ever measure the value of what they had. The wedding was modest, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter that Adisa's money could never buy. no matter how hard she tried to hold on to her tradition. As the night went on and the last of the guests left, Kobe and Nyambura stood hand in hand, their hearts full, ready to face whatever the future would bring together. The first day Nyambura stepped into her new home as a bride, she carried hope in her heart. She believed that love would be enough, that the bond she and Kobe shared would help her find her place in this new house. But her dreams began to shatter the moment she crossed the threshold. Adisa, her mother-in-law, didn't welcome her with warmth or kindness. Instead, she pointed towards the outdoor kitchen and said coldly, "That's where you'll sleep." Nyambura stood frozen, confused and heartbroken, but she didn't protest. She quietly took her few belongings and settled into the smoky, dusty corner of the cooking hut, where the floor was made of hard clay and the air always smelled of ashes. From that night onward, Adisa's cruelty only grew worse. She never missed a chance to remind Nyambura that she had brought no dowry. "You came with nothing. You are nothing," she would spit out every morning, her words cutting deeper than any blade. When guests came over, Adisa would pretend to smile, but her eyes always carried contempt. Behind closed doors, she would throw Nyambura's clothes outside, complain about her cooking, and accuse her of being lazy. Even the smallest mistake, like slightly burnt food or a delay in fetching water, would turn into a storm of insults. But Adisa didn't stop at home. She took her poison to the neighbors, whispering lies into their ears. "She's only here to steal our family's land," she would say with fake concern. "A poor girl, with no background, no class. She's tricked my son with her innocent face." Slowly, people began to look at Nyambura differently. They stopped smiling at her when she passed. They whispered as she walked by, judging her without knowing her truth. Some even avoided her at the market, choosing to believe the venom that Adisa spread so easily. All the while, Kobe stayed silent. The same man who had fought for her love, who had stood up to his mother once, now sat quietly at the dinner table, eyes fixed on his food, while his mother's insults flew across the room. Nyambura looked at him for support many times, hoping he would say something, anything, to stop the madness. But Kobe had grown afraid of his mother's rage, afraid of being disowned, afraid of the very battle he had once promised to fight. His silence hurt more than Adisa's words, because in it, Nyambura felt abandoned. The house that should have been her safe space had turned into a place of fear and sadness. Every morning she woke up before the sun, cleaned the compound, fetched water, cooked meals, and still nothing was ever enough. Adisa found faults in everything. Nyambura's spirit, once full of joy and laughter, began to shrink. She no longer told stories by the fire. Her eyes stopped shining. She learned to hide her pain behind silence, just as Kobe hid behind his fear. Even when her hands were blistered from endless chores, when her back ached from long hours of work, she never complained. But every night, as she lay on the cold floor of the outdoor kitchen, listening to the wind whisper through the crack, she wondered how love had turned into this. She wondered if anyone saw her suffering. She wondered if Kobe still loved her at all. The nightmare had begun quietly, without warning, and now it wrapped itself around her like thick smoke, choking her slowly. And as each day passed, Nyambura's light dimmed a little more, while Adisa's control grew stronger. But deep inside her, a small voice remained, a voice that whispered, "This is not how your story will end." The tension inside the house grew heavier with each passing day. What began as cruel words soon turned into rage that filled every corner of the home. It started with small things. Adisa throwing a cooking pot across the kitchen when Nyambura added too much salt, or slamming doors when her tea wasn't hot enough. The house was always on edge, as if walking on sharp stones. Nyambura tried harder to please her, to make fewer mistakes, but it didn't matter. Adisa was always waiting for something to explode over. One evening, as Nyambura was setting food on the table, Adisa grabbed the clay pot and smashed it on the ground. "Do you think this is how a wife cooks?" she screamed. The food spilled across the floor, and Nyambura dropped to her knees to clean it silently. That night, Kobe kept his eyes low, chewing without a word, while his mother's anger continued to echo in the air. Then the pushing started. At first, It was in moments of rage, a shove against the wall, a harsh tug of her arm. But soon, Adisa's hands found her face. Slaps would land suddenly, without warning, sometimes for nothing, sometimes just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nyambra's cheeks would sting, her eyes would fill with tears. But she never cried in front of Adisa. She learned to stay quiet, to take it, to survive. One morning, the violence reached a terrifying level. Nyambura was boiling water for tea. Adisa stormed in, shouting about missing firewood and accusing her of stealing. "You think you can fool me?" she yelled. In a flash of anger, Adisa grabbed the kettle and flung the boiling water toward her. By luck, it missed her by inches, splashing against the mud wall behind her. The heat of the steam burned her hand slightly, but she said nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She simply stepped back and held her hand, her heart racing with fear. The screams didn't stop there. Almost every day the neighbors could hear shouting, things breaking, and sometimes muffled cries. But no one came. They closed their doors, looked the other way, pretending not to hear. No one wanted to interfere with Adisa. She was powerful, respected, feared. And Nyambura, a girl with no dowry, no wealth, was easy to ignore. Soon, Nyambura began to wear long sleeves, even in the heat. She covered the bruises on her arms, her legs. She stopped looking people in the eye when she walked through the village. Her once bright smile disappeared, replaced with a silence that spoke louder than any words. The girl who used to tell stories by the river, who used to laugh at the sound of birds, now moved like a shadow in her own home. Kobe saw the changes. He saw the bruises she tried to hide, the way her hands trembled when she reached for things, the way she flinched when someone spoke too loudly. But he said nothing. His silence, once out of fear, now felt like betrayal. And yet, Nyambura didn't blame him. She had stopped expecting anyone to stand up for her. The pain wasn't just physical. It was in every moment she felt invisible. In every second she wondered if love had abandoned her. In every bruise she covered with shame. But somewhere, deep inside the broken parts of her spirit, a quiet strength was building. A strength that one day would no longer stay silent. Every night, when the house went quiet and only the chirping of crickets filled the air, Nyambura would sit alone in the corner of the outdoor kitchen. With trembling hands, she'd take out a small piece of paper and a broken pencil. She wrote letters she never intended to send, letters to her father, to Kobe, even to herself. In those pages, she poured out her pain, her loneliness, and the heavy silence she carried every day. After writing, she would fold them and tuck them beneath the old mat she slept on. Then she'd close her eyes and whisper quiet prayers, asking for strength, asking for a way out. She often thought about leaving. She imagined walking out the gate and never coming back. But then she thought of her father. How proud he was when she got married. How he believed she had found happiness. What would the village say? How would he feel if she returned in shame? That fear kept her rooted, even when her soul begged her to run. One afternoon, her cousin Abeni came to visit unexpectedly. It had been months since they had last spoken. The moment Abeni saw Nyambura, she noticed the change. Her cousin's smile was forced, her eyes empty, her laughter gone. Abeni didn't ask many questions, but she watched. She noticed the bruises half hidden under her sleeve, the way Nyambura jumped at sudden noises, and the way her voice dropped when Adisa passed by. Later that evening, when they were alone, Abeni gently held her hand and whispered, "You don't have to say anything, I know, but you must protect yourself." She told Nyambura to start recording what was happening, to gather proof, not for others, but for her own safety. The next day, Nyambura did something brave. She took a small audio recorder Abeni had left with her and carefully tucked it inside the folds of her wrapper. It was hidden close to her waist, invisible to the eye. She didn't know what she'd do with the recordings yet, but just having it made her feel less alone. For the first time in a long while, Nyambura felt like she was no longer just a victim. She was quietly taking back a little bit of her power. The house was filled with people, laughter, and soft music as a small family ceremony was held to celebrate the harvest season. Neighbors and relatives gathered under the open sky, seated on mats and wooden stools, enjoying food and stories. Nyambura had worked all morning to help prepare the feast. moving quickly between the outdoor kitchen and the main house. Her hands were sore, her feet aching, but she managed a smile as she served drinks and greeted the guests. Adisa, dressed in her finest wrapper and heavy gold earrings, moved through the crowd with pride, acting as if she had done everything herself. As the evening continued, she found her moment. In front of everyone, with voices lowered and attention turned toward her, she looked at Nyambura and began to speak loudly. "Some women come into homes with grace," she said. "Others crawl in like beggars, empty-handed, bringing shame instead of honor." The crowd went silent. Nyambura, caught off guard, tried to remain calm. She stood still, holding a tray, her eyes down. But then, softly, with respect, she replied, "Mother, I have always done my best to serve this home. I've never meant disrespect." Before the words could even settle, Adisa's hand flew through the air. The slap cracked so loud that it silenced the entire compound. The tray fell from Nyambura's hands as she stumbled back, her heel catching the edge of the fire pit where food had just been warmed. She fell hard, her arm grazing the hot stones. Gasps filled the air, plates dropped. Someone screamed. Kobe finally moved. He ran to her, his face pale, and pulled her away from the fire, his hands shaking. Guests stood frozen, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Some looked away, others whispered. But Abini, she didn't stay still. She rushed to Nyambura, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and led her quietly away from the crowd. In a hushed voice, her eyes burning with anger, Abeni whispered, "Enough, you must share the recording now. This ends tonight." Nyambura, tears sliding down her face, nodded slowly. Her heart was broken, her body sore, but something had changed. The world had finally seen what she had suffered alone for so long. Early the next morning, while the house was still quiet and Adisa pretended as if nothing had happened, Abeni took the small recorder and made her way straight to the home of the village chief. She didn't knock softly. She pounded on the wooden door until it opened. Without wasting a second, she explained everything. The chief listened carefully, his face growing more serious with every word. When Abeni played the recording for him, his expression hardened. The voice of Adisa filled the room, sharp, cruel, and undeniable. Her words echoed with hate, her tone filled with power and pride. The chief sat back, shocked. Within hours, an emergency meeting was called. The village elders gathered under the sacred tree at the center of Oduwayne. Word spread quickly. People left their farms and market stalls, all curious about the sudden gathering. By midday, a large crowd had formed. The chief stood, holding the recorder in his hand, and asked for Nyambura to step forward. She had been hiding behind the crowd, unsure if she could face everyone. Her heart beat wildly. What would they say? Would they believe her? Her feet felt heavy. But when Abeni reached for her hand and whispered, "You're not alone anymore," something shifted in her. With slow steps, Nyambura walked to the front, eyes lowered, her body still aching from the night before. The chief gave a respectful nod, then turned to the people. "This is not gossip, this is truth," he said firmly. Then he pressed play. The voice that came from the small speaker left everyone silent. Adisa's angry shouting played clearly for all to hear. She was heard mocking Nyambura's family, threatening her, even accusing her of being worthless. Then came the moment where she screamed, "You came with nothing! I should have burned you myself!" Gasps broke through the silence. Some villagers covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief. No one spoke. No one moved. The truth had finally come out, and it rang louder than any lie Adisa had ever spread. Nyambura stood quietly, her hands trembling, but her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. For the first time, she was truly seen. The village square was full that morning. The air felt different, heavy with truth, buzzing with whispers. Under the old baobab tree, where generations had gathered for justice, a public trial was about to begin. Nyambura sat quietly beside Abeni, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. This time, she wasn't just a victim. She was a voice that could no longer be ignored. The chief stepped forward with his staff in hand, and the crowd hushed. Adisa was called to stand in front of everyone. Her chin was high, her arms crossed, trying to act proud. "These are lies," she shouted. She's turning my son against me. But the chief raised his hand, and silence returned. One by one, people stood up. Women who had once smiled politely at Adisa now came forward with their own truths. She humiliated me when I was newly married, said one. She called my daughter worthless, said another. Years of buried pain began to pour out into the open. Even the men, those who once joked that this was just family drama, now stood quietly, heads lowered, their faces heavy with regret. No one could deny what they had heard with their own ears. Adisa's denial grew weaker with every testimony. She tried to argue, to twist words, but the evidence was too clear, her own voice too loud in that recording. The villagers saw her not as the proud matriarch she pretended to be, but as the woman who had crushed another's spirit without shame. After hours of testimonies and reflection, the chief stood again. His voice was firm, but calm. Adisa, your actions have not only hurt Nyambura, but have poisoned this community with fear and silence. Today, we break that silence. He ruled that Adisa must publicly apologize to Nyambura and the village. She would also serve 12 months of community service, cleaning the market, assisting elders, and teaching young women the value of respect. And finally, a heavy fine was ordered, resources that would be used to support women in difficult marriages. The crowd nodded, some with tears, others with pride. Justice had spoken, and for the first time in a long time, the village stood united with Nyambura. After the trial, Nyambura didn't hold on to anger. She never wanted revenge. All she ever wished for was peace, a chance to breathe without fear, to smile without hiding pain. She returned to her home quietly, her spirit no longer broken, but rising slowly like the morning sun. People began to greet her differently now, with warmth, with respect. The same neighbors who once looked away now looked her in the eye, with understanding and care. Rather than dwell on the past, Nyambura decided to build something new. She gathered a few women under the mango tree near the river, where she once used to share stories. They sat in a circle, quietly at first, but soon voices rose, gentle, trembling, honest. Young wives began to open up. Some cried, some just listened, but all of them felt seen. Nyambura had started a safe space, a support circle where no woman had to suffer in silence again. One day, to everyone's surprise, Adisa appeared at the edge of the circle. She didn't speak. She didn't wear her usual proud face. She just sat down at the back, listening. Her eyes didn't burn with anger anymore, but with something closer to shame and perhaps reflection. Week after week, she returned, always silent, slowly softening like dry earth after the rain. She began to see the damage she had caused, not just to Nyambura, but to other women too. Kobe, too, changed. He stood before the village during a community meeting and said, "I was silent when I should have spoken. I was afraid when I should have protected. But today, I stand with my wife." His voice cracked as he turned to Nyambura and bowed his head in apology. From that day forward, he was no longer just her husband. He became her supporter, her partner in healing. The village was different now. Elders spoke to mothers-in-law about kindness. Young men were taught that silence in the face of abuse is never strength. People remembered Nyambura's courage not because she shouted, but because she endured, and then chose to lift others. She came with nothing, they once whispered, but now they said something else. Soft with pride, she left a legacy,